Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Manalac, and I am one of the partners at Y Combinator. I've been at YC since 2013, and so in the past 6 years, I've seen over 1,000 companies funded. At YC, how many of you are familiar? Okay, so at YC, I'll give you a quick background for those who aren't. We invest in startups and help them as they grow. So when I started at YC in 2013, there were just about 10 of us on the team, and now we are a team of 60. And so now I've seen 1,000 companies go through the program. And so I get asked a lot, why has YC been so successful at helping founders? So I thought I'd share 2 things that I've learned are incredibly important for founders if you're looking to build a billion-dollar company. So first, some quick background on YC for those of you who aren't familiar. Since 2005, we've funded over 2,000 startups. Our companies are now valued at over $150 billion. Some you might recognize, like Airbnb, Dropbox, Stripe. So about 20 of our companies are valued at over $1 billion, and about 100 of them now are valued at over $100 million. So about 30 of our companies are based in Canada, including some incredible companies here in Montreal, like Ready Education, Bus.com, which I think many of you have ridden today, and Aeon 3D. And in the past year alone, in 2018, we funded 25 companies whose founders were based in Canada prior to coming to the program. And many end up coming back here and continuing to build big, successful companies. So every year we do 2 batches, one in the winter and one in the summer. We invest $150K for 7% equity, and we fund about 200 companies per batch. That means about 400 companies per year. We fund all types of companies, from aerospace to biotech to consumer social. And one cool note is that today, about 40% of the companies we fund are based outside the US or were based outside of the US prior to us funding them. When I started at YC 6 years ago, we just funded our first India-focused company. And now a great number of founders are focused on markets outside the US. That's one of the things that has happened in the past 5 or 6 years that's been most exciting to me. So in terms of stage, we fund mostly pre-Series A companies. About 60% of them don't yet have a launched product. 40% of them do, and some have raised millions of dollars prior to joining YC, and some have raised nothing. So in that pre-Series A bucket, stages, it's pretty broad range. So we work with the companies very closely for 3 months and then help them to prepare to fundraise at Demo Day. At Demo Day, they present in front of about 1,000 investors in person and a couple thousand more online. And the average company will raise in the $1 to $2 million range right after Demo Day. Some raise in the Series A range, some raise less than $1 million, but that's the average. So then beyond that, we've built programs to continue to help our startups as they scale. We have a Series A program, a growth program for companies who have about 50 employees who are looking to scale quickly. And we help some of our later stage companies hire executives. So what makes YC work? I've been asked a lot, like, what do you do that has made YC so successful and helped incubate so many successful companies? One count says that 7,000 accelerators have emerged since YC started in 2005, but not all have had the same impact or track record. So I thought I'd walk through 2 things that we do really well. And you don't need to be in YC to put these things in place. So I hope that you can all take something away with you today. But I would argue that having these 2 things is central to building a massive company. So I wanted to talk about coaches and community. You don't need, as I said, you don't need YC to put these things in place, but I'd argue that it's incredibly important to have these 2 things if you are going to be building these ambitious companies. So prior to being at YC, I worked with Alexis Ohanian. So he's the founder of Reddit, and Reddit was in the very first batch of Y Combinator, and they were the first company to be acquired out of YC. And now Alexis is married to Serena Williams, who's one of the greatest athletes of all time. And so Alexis has had the pleasure of working with a ton of founders and a ton of entrepreneurs, and also has interacted with a lot of incredible athletes. So Alexis said recently in a blog post, Why shouldn't executives have coaches? The greatest athletes in the world all have coaches. And I'd argue that every profession, especially if you're trying to be the best, should have some form of coaching. Behind every great athlete is a great coach. And behind every great company and every great founder is a team of people who helped them become the best. So if you're a founder, you need the best team. Because no leader is born a great leader. You need help getting there. So Mathilde Collin, she's the founder of Front, and Front is building shared inboxes for teams. She's a founder I'm personally very inspired by. She was once asked, where did you find the confidence to start your own company? And she said, I wouldn't say I'm inherently confident, and I certainly wasn't when I first started building my company. But what I did was find people in my network who believed in me, and I used that as a way to build my confidence over time. So one of those people she found early on to help her out has become her co-founder. Another who has become her husband, and another is her mentor. She said that when she first started at Y Combinator, a partner told her, she said, a partner told me he knew we were going to be huge. And I think that gave me so much confidence because someone as successful as he was believed in me. It sounds simple, but if you have the right coach, they can inspire you to be a better version of yourself. So Mathilde recently raised $66 million, and she's running an incredible company that people love to work at. But she acknowledges that it's not something that she could have done alone. So let's talk about the most important people on your team first, your co-founders. While it is possible to start a huge company as a solo founder, it's so much harder. And we've just seen this because of all the data, all the thousands of companies we've funded and seen, succeed and fail. If you look at the top 50 companies started by YC founders, only 3 of them were started by solo founders. So if you don't have a co-founder right now, and how many of you are solo founders building? Okay, so if you don't have a co-founder right now, but you're interested in meeting one, here's how I'd go about it. Write down what you're good at, and this is something you could do literally right now as you're listening to me. Write down what you're good at, and then write down what skills you're lacking. Then write down the 3 to 5 people who have those skills that you would consider working with. Maybe you know them from school, from a previous job. Who's the best engineer you know? Who's the best growth person? Then actually email them, email them right now. And talk to them about what you're working on and ask whether they'd maybe want to work on a side project with you. Even if they have a job at Google or anywhere, it's not an excuse not to just ask them. You never know what they'll say. And there's no risk. So here's an experiment we're doing right now at YC around co-founders. So at YC, we have a program called Startup School. It's a free online course that's available to anyone in the world who wants to start a startup. It's actually launching again later this month on July 22nd, and you can still sign up. But what we're doing this batch that we're experimenting with is we're doing an experiment to see if we can help solo founders find co-founders. We built a directory to help solo founders discover one another, and then during Startup School, we also match you up with other solo founders during weekly video group sessions. So by the end of the course, you ideally will have had the opportunity to interact with at least 50 other potential co-founders. And if you don't end up finding a co-founder from this, at least you found a community of people who can empathize with your experience as a solo founder. Here's the thing. As the last group appeared, as they were talking about, doing something new or starting a company can be incredibly isolating. And if you're a first-time founder, especially who doesn't have a lot of friends who are founders, it can be lonely. And starting a company can be isolating and lonely even if you do have co-founders, which is why you should think about what you want your coaching staff to look like. So at YC, each company that goes through our program is put through a group. Sometimes they've called us the Harry Potter for startups. We have 4 groups, 4 houses. And each group has 2 or 3 group partners who are essentially coaches. The group partners have built and scaled companies themselves, and in many cases, they've seen hundreds or over 1,000 companies go through the program. So if you're looking to build that dream team of coaches, here are traits that I've learned that are helpful that you should look for in people who give great advice to startups. So first, ideally, they've done the thing or are doing the thing themselves. Second, ideally, they have more than one data point. And third, it's someone who can give you perspective. So I'll dig into that a little bit. So first, that they've done or are doing the things themselves, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you're starting a company, it's helpful to get advice from founders. Or if there's a particular aspect of company building that you want to learn more about, it's helpful to get advice from someone who has that experience. Say HR, you want to talk to a founder who had to deal with HR. So the second thing is they have more than one data point. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes first-time founders will ask other founders for advice. And this can be really helpful, especially if those founders are in your industry. But the founder that you're asking for advice typically only has one frame of reference, their own company. YC has sort of solved this problem accidentally. When YC started in 2005, one of YC's founders, Paul Graham, they didn't know anything about funding startups. He figured the best way to learn about funding startups quickly was to fund startups in batches. He wanted to collect as many data points as possible. So now, many of the partners I work with have seen 1,000 different companies tackle 10,000 different problems. And this is enormously helpful when you're trying to help startups essentially avoid pitfalls. And we've also seen hundreds of startups fundraise. So it's also helpful for us. We can tell founders if investor terms are weird or abnormal seeming. So third, ideally you want to surround yourself by coaches who have a long history of watching companies succeed and fail. Ideally, these people will be able to push you and expand your thinking on what is possible for you to achieve. But ideally, they've seen enough shit that they're not stressed out by the problems that you're going to ask them about. Essentially, you want someone to tell you when things are going to be okay. And if things are not okay, you want someone who has the wisdom to tell you that they're not. So I've learned this personally from a lot of the partners that I've worked with at YC. So a lot of the partners have overcome an incredible amount of difficulty and an incredible amount of challenges in their own companies. So one time when I was super stressed about something that was happening at YC, I turned to my partner and YC CEO Michael Seibel. And I said, it never seems like anything stresses him out. He always looks at challenges as sort of he's like, oh, this is a puzzle or this is an opportunity. And so I asked him, why does nothing stress you out? And he said, back when I was running Justin TV, and for those of you who don't remember, Justin TV was a platform that helped people live stream their lives. It was the precursor to Twitch. They pivoted and then, Twitch came out of that. He said, back when I was running Justin TV, someone committed suicide on my platform. And experiencing that gave him a lot of perspective on the problems that really matter. There are, of course, problems that are worth getting stressed over. But there are a lot of day-to-day problems that founders do get stressed by that if you have good coaches, they can tell you, this isn't a big deal. We can figure this out. We can help you. And you want someone to help you navigate those situations. So, as I said, you don't need YC to create a team of coaches. We just make them very accessible to our founders. But if you are looking to build that team around you, here's how you can go about it. And it's similar to the co-founder finding process. Write down your dream team of coaches, the best people that you can get introduced to or that you know. Ideally, they've built a company or are domain experts in part of the business that you want to learn about. And talk to them. There's literally no risk in asking. So the founders of Airbnb, for example, when they were first getting started, they asked Michael Seibel for help. And Michael Seibel was, he was a founder back then and building his own company, but he ended up introducing them to YC and Paul Graham, and then the rest is history for them. So don't ever be afraid to ask. The worst thing that can happen is, you don't get a response or people say no, but no risk there. So the first thing that we give people easy access to is a team of coaches. And the second important thing is giving them access to a strong founder network. So prior to being at YC, I really didn't understand how truly powerful a strong founder community can be. So here's a crazy stat. It's said that about 75% of venture-backed startups fail. But at YC, 70% of the companies we've ever funded are still alive. And they're not just alive, they're thriving. There's 100 over 100 million, 20 that are worth over $1 billion, so they're doing pretty well. Almost every alumni at YC when I ask them, what do you like best about the program? They all tell me it's the community. And I attribute this level of success to the culture of paying it forward that Paul and Jessica baked into YC since the very beginning. So at the kickoff dinner, which is like the first dinner of every batch, we tell all the founders, for the next 3 months, call in all the favors, use partner time, reach out to alumni and ask for help, use all the resources that we have here. And then it's up to you, when you're a successful founder, to pay it forward and to respond to the emails and calls when future founders call asking you for help. These are the founders of Airbnb, for example. They come back to YC every batch, and they do a talk for the companies in the current batch. And then they give them advice and answer questions. And the mentality of giving back is so strong that it even extends to the people who become partners at YC. One of my partners recently said that he's at YC because it feels like it helps him pay back a debt that he can never repay. YC changed his life to such a great extent that he thinks the best thing he can do is now give back to the community. But even if you're not in YC, there are great ways to DIY or semi-DIY a founder community. So a few of the network effects that we've experienced from having a really engaged founder community have been talked about a little bit. For example, we've built software that helps our founders connect. It's called Bookface. It's like LinkedIn meets Facebook meets Quora, and every day there are founders on there asking each other for help. They ask each other for help on SEO issues, ask for help, introductions to potential customers. And founders can also launch on this platform prior to launching publicly. So, oftentimes I think the best advice you can get, or product advice, is from other makers and other founders. And on Bookface, you have a community of about 4,000 founders to provide that for you. And so, of course, if you're a company that sells to other companies, for example, Brex, which is a credit card for startups, you can easily get, the first 100 paying customers from the YC network. So, as I said, though, you don't need YC to build this network, and I think it's something that you can do here in Montreal. And for example, one thing that you can do is group office hours. So at YC, during YC batches, we have something called group office hours. And it's every 2 weeks you sit down with your partners and a group of 5 or 6 other companies. And during these group office hours, we talk about what are the 2 things you've accomplished in the past 2 weeks? What are the 2 things you hope to accomplish in the next 2 weeks? What are your biggest challenges or blockers? And then we talk about one different theme every week. So last week I was in group office hours, and the theme was what's your favorite growth hack? And everyone goes around and shares theirs. So this is clearly something that you could build within the founder community here. And I think having these regular check-ins or semi-regular check-ins with founders keeps you honest. It'll keep you honest about your progress, about your numbers, and it'll help stave off the loneliness of building a company. Often you don't have a huge team of people to bounce ideas off of, and it'll help you remember that there are other founders out there who are tackling the same problems that you're tackling, and hopefully you can help each other solve them. So another way to sort of DIY your own community is to piggyback off of Startup School, which I mentioned earlier. So we've seen the community be so powerful to YC founders that we wanted to figure out a way to scale it and to make it something that was more accessible to anyone in the world who wanted to start a company. So we started Startup School, and last batch we launched something that's sort of like Bookface, but for anyone participating in the Startup School program. One thing we're constantly doing at YC is experimenting. So we're constantly experimenting to see how we can make the program better. And right now, we're doing a lot of experiments with Startup School to see how we can make that community stronger. So for example, this batch, we're doing dynamic grouping, which means founders are placed into weekly group video chats with other founders who are similarly engaged and at similar stages. And so this wouldn't be a YC talk if I didn't talk briefly about not getting distracted. So at YC, we say the only things you should be doing while you're at YC are coding and talking to users. Building product and talking to users, and everything else is a waste of time. And that is very true for the early stages of your company. But also remember that your chances of success go up exponentially when you surround yourself with the right team. co-founders, coaches, other founders. So give yourself the best chance to succeed and build up this support system and this family of founders early. Thank you.